So we got started in 2021, and this work has always been about identifying disparities in the energy system. We know the harms of companies like EBTI are impacting all of us, but Black, Indigenous, rural communities, people without internet, the harms are not distributed evenly. Our work has been focused on identifying not only what those harms are, but how they're created, and then partnering with grassroots organizations to oppose the big utilities that are creating a utility system that is so unjust and inequitable. We are very much aligned with the work of A2P2. We see public power as a really critical endpoint for this work. And in the meantime, we're looking to weaken the utilities' power through formal regulatory intervention. So we've been in a number of rate cases. We're also supporting building up the power of grassroots organizations in a number of ways, whether that's through fundraising, whether that's data analysis, trying to get more people involved. And this is one of those projects. So we're here to talk about what we hear from EBTI that they're actually charging us on our bills, right? And then what the realities are. Does anybody know what you're paying, let's say, during the summer months for electricity? Great. And how do you know what you're paying per kilowatt hour?
20 cents.
Yeah, 2021.
Yeah, I think the formal line is 21 cents off peak and 25 now on peak, which is like 20% higher during the summer. But then we have all these other fees that get tacked on there. And so most folks in a place like Ann Arbor, if you can pay your bill consistently, those fees are things like there's Michigan sales tax, right? There's surcharges for nuclear decommissioning and other power plant decommissioning, low income surcharges, which are a good thing. But there's this whole set of fees that you see. About a year ago, we were in a EBTI rate case and we looked at a handful of energy bills that they provided, just a random sample. And we saw all these other charges that were there. So whether that's late fees that people are charged, extra deposits and reconnection fees, which can be based on their credit scores, people that may have appliance protection programs that they didn't know they signed up for, or alternative gas suppliers, right? All these things add up to much more expensive bills than I think people are anticipating. And so we want to do our own ground truthing for research and say, here's what people are actually paying. And we think there's a lot of value in comparing those bills across communities too. So thinking about what we're paying here in Ann Arbor, right, and how that compares to the rates that people actually end up paying in places like Detroit or Pentronic that may be a lot deeper. This is our kind of constellation of work that we do. So again, similar values that were about data transparency, energy democracy. We're big believers that energy is a human right. It's not some safe level of shutoffs or people that should get intermittent energy only when they can afford it. This needs to be universal access to clean energy. And then we've got this piece around public institutions. And I think our values support this, that we try to be unequivocal in our support for communities of color, to be really clear that we seek to be in authentic, non-extractive relationships with frontline partners, and all of this make hard decisions to make sure that we are not aligned with utilities that are causing the harm, basically, and turn down work that may lead us in that direction. We've got some more background about our work in the back if you want to check that out. Also, our website's pretty easy to remember. It's just energyequityproject.org if you want to see some more of the kinds of work that we've done. I've done work around reliability, so Rahul made a great web app. You can see reliability for any census tract now in the state and how that compares and ranks to other communities. So we are actively challenging DT in rate cases, and the sorts of things that we're advocating there are a moratorium on shutoffs. So DT, if you look at the curve, which is now public on shutoffs, that continues to increase. They have fewer and fewer people on affordability plans and are offering fewer and fewer credits. When they do run a pilot for something that works, they then quickly abandon the program that actually worked. So they've done this with a percentage of income payment plan, which was going to set everybody's maximum payment at 10% of income, which is still a pretty high amount to spend on energy, but they abandoned that after showing that was their most successful affordability program. They've abandoned a lot of time of use plans, right, to incentivize people to shift their loads off peak. When they found people responded to that, they said, actually, that's going to hurt our bottom line, so we don't want to do that. So these are the kinds of things that we're calling out in testimony. And then again, calling out a lot of the racial and class disparities that we see in what people are paying, in the reliability that they experience. Do you want to talk about our data approach?
Yeah, I think a lot of the time when people talk about data, it comes from a very top-down perspective, like this is what the data says, so this is what a community must feel, or it's a lot about talking down to communities of like, we're only able to say so many things. A lot of the time that loses a lot of the human element, a lot of the human struggle, a lot of the household struggles that people are facing. So we're really, at the Energy Equity Project, a lot about talking to communities first, understanding their narratives. We do a lot of qualitative research that Justin leads, and then we kind of go back and look at the data and see what supports this, what can we best highlight, how can we empower a lot of these stories and a lot of these struggles, rather than kind of going data first, people second. So that's a lot of what we try to put forward, so that it's a really human element and really human face to a lot of the work we're doing, especially in rate cases as well.
All right, so we're going to get into the work that we're starting now. This is our real first public pitch to get people to be citizen contributors to this work, or community contributors, because we only know so much, right? DTE doesn't want to give us a lot of the data, so a lot of times we have to collect our own data so that we can really tell the true story of how bad things are. So this current rate hike, they're asking for $573 million. As Greg was talking about, our appointed MPSC commission, which many people in this space will say is one of the more progressive commissions. We don't really see that. It's pretty formulaic with what happens with these rate cases. There was one case where the majority of DTE's request was rejected, but then it was quickly reapproved the next year. But pretty much everything that they put forward, they get about 55% of what they ask for. So I don't know that we need to go through 5,000 pages of testimony and 8 months of proceedings in order to get to that outcome, because it's pretty much the same every time. 55% of 573 million, I don't know, 300 million and change, we're looking at giving in addition to what we're already paying to DT. So that's what's on the line now. This came out in April. They also get a pretty great return on equity regardless of how they perform, right? For all of their infrastructure includes things like tree trimming. It's not really infrastructure, but they get credit for it. They're going to make a 10% profit on that pretty much without fail. There's no commitment to us for any sort of performance, even though there's supposedly performance-based rate making. They don't actually have to improve their reliability. There's no threat to their profits for failing to do that. And then the part that really irks me is a lot of this gets put on residential customers as industrial customers and commercial customers see their rates stay much flatter, right? So why are we the ones for additional shareholder profits when big companies don't have to worry about it so much? Yeah, so that's the problem. And then Rahul's going to step in with more around the data side here.
So a little bit more about why we're here to ask you to contribute your utility bills or your energy usage data and consumption data. We're not doing this just because I personally love data. Many households struggle with high energy burdens and really struggle with energy affordability. This is unequally distributed across geographic lines, income lines, race lines, education lines. Urban versus rural divide plays a huge factor in this. Here we have a map of the state of Michigan. You can see the green areas are supposedly areas where you have good energy affordability versus the yellow, orange, red. That's when you're starting looking at really detrimental energy affordability, with the red even being 1 in 5 of your household dollars going towards your utility bill, right? Every state has their own rates. Every utility has their own rates, and a lot of their designs. And a lot of the time, big institutions won't listen to like household struggles or narratives without a number attached to it. And it's really hard for us to do that without being able to actually represent the communities we're involved with. Otherwise, we kind of have to take DT's word that they're doing exactly what they're doing. They're making it as affordable as possible. So it's really about trying to make this situation a lot more transparent and really elevating a lot of these voices. If we could go to the next slide. So previously we were able to do this at a national level, with what was called the DOE LEAD tool, which was the Department of Energy's low-income energy affordability tool. Now it wasn't perfect, but it provided approximate energy consumption, energy costs as a percentage of your income for all of the country. Now, this was great. It was the only data set to ever do this. With recent administration changes, it was one of the data sources that went dark almost immediately. So this is no longer available across the whole country. There are a few different archival efforts underhand to be able to still offer it. However, this itself wasn't perfect. It only offers approximations from really small sample spaces, a lot of the time from urban and big city areas, which often disregarded a lot of the rural areas as well as low-income neighborhoods around. And it also only measured data from 1 month. And it never published what month. So it could have been July, it could have been August, it could have been September, it could have been December. And we actually have really bad data in terms of like the geographic representation. So we lost out on seasonal variations if people were getting really high energy costs in the winter here in Michigan because they want to heat up their homes, or really high energy costs in the summer, for example, in Texas when they want to cool down their homes. All of that was lost, and it was all essentially aggregated for a lot of the Northeast corridor. So it wasn't perfect when it wasn't around, but it was the only one we had. And now we don't have that at all to be able to defend in public testimony or in rate cases. This is really an effort to be able to kind of say, if we had an ideal data set, an ideal database where we're able to talk about community experiences and real community costs, this is how we're going to try to go about it. We can go the next one. So why energy bill transparency? Well, like I said, we don't really have a data set that covers what people are paying for their energy bills. Advertised costs versus real costs often are really different. And a big part of it is that they'll only show energy costs associated with your consumption. A lot of the costs that Justin was talking about, so your fixed costs in terms of like your connection costs, if you have a gas hookup, all of these things, and taxes, all of that gets basically abstracted away. So utilities are saying, we present really affordable rates, but you have a 20% surcharge with all of the other fixed rates, and all of that got hidden before. So none of that was able to be taken into account. So yeah, we can go to the next slide. So we're really trying to democratize a lot of this data. We're shifting model from models that were purely mathematical, very geographically focused, to what's actually happening in these communities. We're trying to build with communities and not just talk for them. So this is why we're trying to come up in rooms like these and spaces like these to try to see if people are willing to help us out, what are they most interested in, and how they want to use their data for good. And really, this is about putting, again, a human face to it. So it's your bills. We want to really advocate for your voice in a lot of this testimony work. So it's really about building a lot of collective power for a lot of this advocacy. So what we'll create together, the first ever energy burden database that's going to be community focused and built for communities by communities. A couple of things about it is it's going to be completely independent. So all of our funding doesn't come from the federal government. It comes from different foundations and other organizations. So we're independently funded. Energy insecurity and energy inaffordability doesn't really stop year round, and neither do we. So we're constantly advocating. Again, it's going to be community level, so it's going to try to highlight as much as we can local community effects. So where we're comparing, for example, Ann Arbor to Detroit to Hamtramck, we're going to be able to do those things in a way that we weren't able to do so before. And it's going to be completely open source. So we're really about data transparency, and we want to make sure this is going to be a free and affordable tool, or well, free tool for academic institutions, for any kind of advocates as well. So what does participating in this project actually mean? So it's got about 4 key concepts. You download your utility bills. That's going to be the first step. You upload them onto a form that we'll have in the back over there. So just downloading a bunch of PDFs and uploading them onto a form. Alternatively, you can also send us an email with all of them as well. And then we'd love to hear more about yourself. So if you'd love to contribute a little bit about your stories, a little bit about what your household's looking like, that really helps us make really strong arguments around, we have really affordable energy burdens or energy bills for these types of households, but really not the case for others as well. So it's a nice one-to-one comparison. And then as much as you can, if you can share with your communities, with your friends, with your neighbors, so that we can really spread the word as much as possible. I think a really big part of this is maintaining privacy and security. So just because you're contributing to this scientific effort, to this advocacy effort, we want to make sure that you feel secure and we're building trust together with these communities. All of your personal and identifiable information that appears in your utility bill, for example, none of it will ever be digitized, none of it will ever be shared, and it will always be protected. And we're going to go through it in a couple more specific ways in which this happens. What we're going to be looking for in digitizing and recording and providing are the rates that you pay, so that cents per kilowatt hour. Those numbers will record any kind of fixed rates that we see or fixed fees that we see, including any taxes that you pay on your bills. That will be recording fuel type. So if you're using gas or if you're fully electric, we'll be recording that, and then just the different kind of rate plans that you're enrolled in. But none of your address, your name, account number, none of that will ever be in the database. We can go to the next one. So what happens with your bill data more specifically is your bills are going to get scanned into our system. As they get scanned, we store all that relevant information. So all of that rate data, cost data, such that kind of stuff. No personal data. Your addresses get transformed into neighborhoods. So we use your address only for one point to just see like where across the map you are, but it never actually gets mapped to a specific household, just to a general neighborhood area. It then gets aggregated and then stored on a database, and then we advocate for your community or for the state of Michigan at large with it. Going into a little bit more around how we're going to actually protect the bills once they're with us. So keeping your data secure, as we're scanning your bills and processing and aggregating your data, once all of that's done, you might ask, what do you do with my actual PDF that I've submitted? We don't actually keep the PDF in its raw form. All of your bills then get encrypted at the highest possible level, and so then get stored in a password protected drive. So even if they broke into the password protected drive, they wouldn't be able to access any of your bills because all of them would be fully encrypted. So none of them actually stay saved as a raw PDF ever. This is the same kind of encryption service that a lot of government databases use. This is the same encryption service that a lot of Fortune 500 companies use. So it's really encryption at the highest level that if it gets broken into, we have a massive issue nationwide or at an international scale as well. So that's really what the project's about, a little bit about privacy and your data security and maintaining anonymity. Any questions or feedback? I really want to make sure that, especially around privacy and security, any questions that you have, we're here to answer them as much as possible. Yeah.
Do you mind coming up and talking to the mic, because we got the mic up here, to ask your question?
And we just, I think you're doing this by census tract. Is that a good guess?
So one of the so the question was, at what geographic level we're going to be summarizing this data. So census tract is one. We're actually going to be doing it by census block, and we're going to be building blocks into neighborhoods. So it's a little bit of like an in-between of the two.
And Harold, do you want to just let people know roughly how many people are in census blocks and tracts?
Yeah, so in census blocks, it can be anywhere from around like 4,000, a population of 4,000 or more. Census tracts, we're usually looking at about 10 to 20,000 people. And so this is the level that you get aggregated at.
And what can you conclude? How you do it?
Yeah, so the question was on how do we make all of this, or how do we validate our data? And how do we make sure we're getting a statistically significant sample? So right now we're at the current stage of just collecting, and we're really going to try to collect as much as possible with these communities. And so right now it's about getting to that level, right? How we kind of ground truth that is we have all of these census level data for these different census tracts. So for these different neighborhoods, we know roughly how many households are at that 0 to 100% federal poverty level. We know roughly how many households are at that 100 to 200 level, et cetera. And so once we have enough of the information, we can then kind of just say, okay, we've got enough across these groups to be actually having a statistically representative sample space. But right now, it's just that collection point.
Yeah, they still self-selectors.
Which is actually part of the theory here, right? That being active by contributing something to this hopefully gets you more interested, right? In joining up with A2P2 or the Dismantle DTE campaign that's happening in Detroit. So that's kind of like, this is also an entry point for people to feel empowered, right? Like you've contributed something and maybe you're interested in the policy piece too that comes from that. That's a thought. And then another thing here, right, is we want to actually give people tools to address any issues that they have with their bills. So this has been done with emergency room bills, where people submitted everything, and they've actually gotten a lot of advocacy and legal support, right, for if you've been only getting estimated bills, let's say EBTI, right, or you said, I didn't want to be on this plan, and DT never made the switch for you. Those are things where we can directly support people in filing those complaints, getting better rate plans.
Yeah.
So I just have a couple of context questions. So
Yeah.
How large a sample size are you trying to get in Ann Arbor? What's your geographic reach? Do you have kind of a timeline on the project?
Yeah, so our
If you
initial
don't
focus
mind.
is Ann Arbor and Detroit for this current rate case, which will run for basically the rest of the calendar year. So we're able to get data in by early fall. we think that could affect the rate case outcomes. We're working with Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition in Detroit to do something similar and do outreach with their members. We don't have a hard number of bills that we're getting. More is better. I'd say like a couple hundred in each community would give us some statistical power to work with. And they don't all have to come from members, right? Like if you know neighbors or friends that you want to say, hey, I'm doing this, are you interested? That'll help us get more power to put into the rate case.
So how many bills do you want? Which is to ask, what's the temporal depth you want in terms of bills?
That's a great question. So the question was, how many bills would we like to receive? So short answer is the more across a wider range of months is better, but we're going to go through a couple of the steps for how we're going to go about this. So to get started, there are a couple different ways. We'll have this QR code here, but we'll also have it up front for the form. You can just kind of scan it, submit your bills, and then you're all set and done. We've also got an alternative approach. We also have DTE information access forms from DTE. So where you would put your information and you provide a signature, and that actually allows us to submit that to DTE and request your data on your behalf. So that's another approach. You can also provide your email address and we'll reach out to you.
So are you looking for 6 months, a year, 2 years?
DT will give you a year readily or 13 months, I believe.
So that's what you can download a year.
Right?
Yeah.
So we get a full season.
Yeah.
At least.
Okay.
Yeah, if we could do essentially January to
Yeah.
December so that we can hit, all the seasons, that would be best so that
Yeah.
we can show
Great.
the peaks and
Yeah.
highs.
And you can actually download it's hourly data for electric
Yeah.
and then daily data for gas.
Yep.
So I would love to share this with my friends. It'd be very helpful if there were an email that you could send that would
Yes.
give kind of the highlights about this, including the data security issue. So I
Yeah.
can just forward it and say,
Yeah.
scan this, and people will do it if it's.
No, definitely. So that's going to be one of the approaches is if you leave a contact with us in the back, we'll be able to send out an email with a summary of this information, the slide deck as well, so that you can reference and share as much as possible.
We'll send that.
Have members at the very least as well with all this info.
And will it be on energyequityproject.org?
Yeah.
It will.
The, great.
Yeah, if we can go to a couple next slides. So yeah, this is more of the information. This is going to be the main email address. If you have any questions about this, it's data@energyequityproject.org, and then we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Let's go to that next one. So I'm just going to go through a little quick walkthrough of what submitting a bill would actually look like with the DTE portal. We'll do this in a couple of ways, so it's more so what works best for you in your situation, but there'll be a couple of different approaches. So usually when you go to DTE, you'll be faced with this login portal. You put in your info. It does have to be account holder's info to be able to sign in. Once you've gone through that, you'll enter a portal that looks very much like this for your current bill. You'll want to check my account history there on the right-hand side, highlighted there, that red box. Once you click there, you'll get access to all of your statements. So it doesn't initially pop up. Let's go to the next one. And then you'll have your list of all, it should give you all of your statements, but if you could give us your last 12 months or January to December, that would be incredibly useful for us. And then you have to do a statement by statement download. Alternatively, if you want to provide us with 13 months of data, but you don't really want to go through all of this, there's a really kind of like 2-click solution. Instead of going into my account history, you go into my energy usage data. Once you're there, you'll click on download data, and then they'll give you a date range. This is where you select, for example, January of last year, 2024 to December of 2024. And you'll need to do this for gas and for electric separately. Again, that can all be a hassle. If you scroll to the bottom, you'll get this generate link button, and that's the only thing you need to do. You click on that generate link. If you can go to the next slide, it'll give you a link. You just copy it and send it to our email. You don't have to send it to your utility bills or anything like that. It'll give us your full consumption data. I know it was a little bit of a speed run throughout, but I just wanted to give an overview. And again, all of these slides will be made available. I'll send them to A2P2, but again, we'll have more information on the back as well. So there are a couple ways to help us out. Any other questions that you might have or anything?
Yeah, so I actually have a question about the reliability map that you mentioned at the start of the talk.
Yeah.
So I know that this is going to be kind of a wonky follow-up or data question. I know that there are a bunch of different statistics that are used to measure reliability, right? There's SAIDI, there's CA, right? All these different. So I'm curious with that map, what, statistics you have present there and, why you chose them, I guess. Just because I've explored this a little bit and tried to get an understanding of it, but it seems kind of opaque, all these different numbers and, which ones to use.
Yeah, so if we go all the way back up, there's like a map of Michigan. There. So this one's not reliability, this one's affordability. So this tracks, for example, how much a household is spending as a percentage of their income. As you were asking about reliability, you mentioned there's like SAIDI, CAIDI, SAIFI, all of these different numbers around outage duration, things like that. What I found most useful and I thought could really be helpful for advocacy, specifically for Michigan, is Michigan has this standards mandated by the MPSC that at any time, DTE has to have at least 90% of their customers restored, for example, within X amount of time, depending on the weather conditions. So on like a normal sunny to semi-cloudy day, that's within 24 hours. They have to be able to have people back up and running. When it's catastrophic conditions, so you can think of like really heavy winter storm, that's up to 48 hours. Now, the issue there is that's across all of their customers across the whole service territory, right? So it doesn't matter if it's a really small pocket of like, really populous area that's always getting reconnected and you've got a bunch of rural areas that are getting left out. If you analyze the really big pockets of neighborhoods that continuously get ignored, because you can kind of say these are going to be the same 10% of households that I just don't care about because they're not going to complain as much or they just don't know how to complain. And I'm just going to focus on this other 90. And that becomes a repeating trend across. We analyzed it over about a year and a half. So I think all of those numbers are great. I think if you can tie it back to like these regulatory kind of standards, it always becomes a little bit, it helps add context. Yeah.
So, but following up on this data, do you have data at the census tract level about these kind of reliability issues?
Yes.
Because I'm just thinking practically, we can use that to target neighborhoods that
Yes.
are more inclined to want to support us than others because they're suffering more.
Yeah, so these are the kinds of outcomes that we get from rate cases, right, where they're required to do some additional data transparency piece, and then they submit these in really terrible formats, and Rahul works to clean them and make them accessible, because otherwise
That's
they're
great.
just-
Great for us.
Yeah.
So you guys have energy reliability models that are open and available?
Yeah, at the census tract level, we can also share that if you're interested. We essentially did one for DTE and for consumers, being the two largest utilities in Michigan, and that's at the census tract level. That's using documents that were submitted to the MPSC. Funnily enough, since we're here talking about DTE, they were one of the utilities that submitted basically no reliability data, even though they're mandated by law. They would submit empty spreadsheets to the MPSC and nobody was checking them. Not a lot of people are very interested in reliability, unfortunately. So after a few complaints, they then were mandated to correct that. But yeah, you can see how a data transparency issue becomes a huge part of a lot of what we do because of the fact that even when it's mandated, they can get away with submitting empty files if nobody's checking.
Are you considered a project on data arrogance?
I really like that term.
So I'm part of an A2P2 research group, Schott and I are two of the people. And we've looked at the data over the last 30 years with regard to how the industrial sector and the commercial sectors have been increasingly subsidized by retail, by residents.
Yeah.
Two questions. One is, are you seeing that other places in Detroit or across the
Yeah,
country?
that's a national trend.
Really, why is DTE feeling that's their best model here? Because you would think that residents would be pushing back, but maybe they just feel that their commercial customers, industrial customers are more powerful.
Yeah, so the ways typically that residents push back are things like public comment, and the commission says it legally cannot consider that as evidence, whereas the industrial customers have lawyers in the cases, and so they're much more formidable advocates for their own rates, right? And I think the utilities are happy to get more from the residents than try to battle with the industrials.
Your data and our data is showing that the rate of increase is way higher than inflation.
Oh, yeah, for a few different states, yeah, for residents especially.
And so is there not, and does the NPSC ever have to address that question? You know, why is it so out of?
Supposedly based on a revenue requirement, which includes covering infrastructure costs, covering operations, and a shareholder profit. Pages of testimony saying this is why we need $573 more million dollars. And MPSC says, we know we're not supposed to let you get everything, so we'll give you 55%.
I wonder if you could speak at all to how DTE maybe compares to other utilities in terms of number of shutoffs and potentially even like collections and those types of aspects of the
Yeah,
impact.
of the ones that report, only about half the states require their industrial utilities to report. But DT has been around the top 10 for shutoffs and other collections metrics, or similarly punitive. A lot of the states in the South either don't report or they reported up until 2021 or 2 and then saw this is not a good look, like Florida Power and Light cut off nearly 1 million customers in 2022, I think, and then it just said, actually, we're done. Nobody can see that anymore. So, but yeah, DT is up there with the worst.
And do you think that, is that like motivated by, yeah, I mean, I guess, is it because they're less affordable or is it because they're more aggressive with shutoffs or a little bit of both?
I think they're more aggressive. There's a lot of money to be made actually in the whole
The fees.
collections infrastructure, we call it. So you get one utility, Ameren in Illinois, just their gas utility was getting 32 million a year in late fees alone, which they're filing to the SEC. So it was a significant chunk of their profit. So you only get this if you keep people in energy poverty, if they keep having to pay you deposits, if you keep charging reconnection fees, the whole thing ends up financially profitable for utilities.
If I could, or do you look at all in terms of private utilities or versus like MUs and municipalized?
We're just starting, we put out about 50 FOIA requests for municipal data because very few are publicly reporting that. So we should have more information back about that soon.
My hope or suspicion is that they're more well behaved, but
It depends where you are. The ones that actually have the worst shut-off rates, we've seen small munis in the South, like 10,000 people. Some of them average a shut-off per person per year. And we don't know what the distribution is, how many are, the same person as every other month, we don't know. But there's some extremely harsh behaviors in some of the smaller conservative cities. Yeah, great questions. There's so much to talk about.
I've
here.
Sorry, I just have a quick logistics question, which is, you mentioned Ann Arbor and Detroit. Is IPSI within the?
Yeah, so we're
bounds,
not limiting.
Okay,
this.
okay.
And, our hope is to do something similar, but this is our backyard and our home partners.
Sure.
So we'll see where we get here before saying we should do this in other states.
Cool. And is there did I catch the deadline as all until the fall to submit?
Well, we'll take it any time. That's our push.
Yeah, okay,
Is
okay.
For this to be relevant.
When you say rate cases, and I understand you to be talking about DTE's requests for for more money from the commission. But does that have another meaning, like maybe individuals who are seeking clarification or relief or anything like that?
No, sorry, that's the right
Okay.
understanding of it.
Okay.
It's the formal proceedings with the NPSC. Yeah, and DT files is allowed to file every year, which is extreme compared to other states. A lot of states have once every 3 years. And it's terribly costly to any organization that wants to intervene to finish one thing and 2 months later they file again.
Yeah.
Terrible practice.
the current ask is like the largest in like a decade, right, or something like that?
Yeah, I think maybe ever, or maybe there was one that was slightly.
The second largest ever.
Yeah.
And last year kind of was too, and the year before that, like, just keep asking for. But they're probably asking for amount knowing 55% is what they want to expect to get.
They'll say, oh, we have these IT needs, or we need to modernize our system for billing or whatever. But they ask for that